Hi, boys and girls. This is Grandma Sheila, and our story this week is called Canoe Trip with an Angel. Well, the Frisbee family, they knew that the Miami River was a great river to go canoeing on. But when they had gotten there, they had gone to the canoe rental place. And the man said, "It's been raining and raining and raining, and the water in the river is way too high to be safe. You can't go on the river right now." So the family waited, and they waited several days. And on Sunday, they went back to the rental place, and the man said, "Well, yes, the river's down. It's safe now. You can go. You can rent their canoe from us, and you can go down the river." There was Mother and Father and Lisa and Jerry. Well, they got to the river with that canoe, and Mother got in the front, and Lisa and Jerry got in the middle. Everybody was trying to put on their life preservers, and Lisa, she was working on the front of hers when all of a sudden she looked up at Daddy. You know, the Frisbee family had recently learned about Jesus, and they had given their heart to him. And little Lisa, she said, "Daddy, don't you think we should pray to Jesus and ask him to protect us on the river?" Well, the whole family thought that was a good idea. So right there, they bowed their heads and they asked Jesus to protect them. That's always a good idea. Well, after their prayer, Daddy pushed the canoe off into the water. He jumped in the back and he picked up the two oars and he started to row. But you know, they had only been canoeing once before. And poor Daddy, that boat was like it had a mind of its own. It didn't want to go to the way Dad wanted it to go. It wanted to turn around in a circle. Well, finally, after much hard work, Dad finally got the canoe to go straight down the river. Well, it was a beautiful day. And suddenly, Jerry said, "Dad, aren't we going awfully fast?" Well, Dad, he said, "Yes, the current is really strong." And then Lisa said, "Daddy, I don't like going over the white water. It's scary." Well, then Mother's pointed off to the side of the river and she said, "When we were here before, wasn't there a danger sign there? It's not there anymore. Maybe it got swept away with all the water in the river." Well, it did seem to be getting deeper, and it was much swifter, and there was lots and lots of white water. When they went over the white water, it was just really rough underneath that canoe. But Daddy, he looked at his family and he kind of smiled and he said, "God's with us. He's going to protect us. Why don't you guys all look at the pretty nature around us?" He wanted them to think about something else. In front of them, the water got really, really smooth. Now, this was much easier for Dad to row that canoe, and it felt so much better. Well, then Mom, who was their lookout in the front, she said, "Look, Dad, look at that huge tree in the middle of the river." Well, it was a huge tree, and it must have been washed out by the flood that had come through when the water was so high. It must have just been washed down one of the embankments, and there it lay right in the middle of the river with its roots really, really high behind it. Dad looked at it and he said, "It must be 30 feet long or more." Mother said, "You better be careful." Well, Dad said, "It's rowing much easier now." Lisa, she was getting kind of scared. She reached out and she put both hands holding onto the side of the canoe. Then Mother said, "Look, Dad, there's a bunch of white water in front of us, in front of that tree." Well, Dad was trying to be real careful. And then all of a sudden, that rushing current underneath the canoe grabbed the canoe and steered him right straight toward that big tree trunk. Ooh! Now Lisa really was praying, but it wasn't very long till all of a sudden the current rolled that canoe over, and Mom flew this way, and Dad and Lisa and Jerry flew the other way. When Dad came up out of the water, the first thing he did was to try to figure out what he should do. His first thought was of his kids. He had looked at the canoe and it was upside down. He was kind of treading water there. And he thought, how can I turn it over? What if the kids are trapped underneath of it? And while he was thinking that, he didn't know how, but the canoe turned over. And the really funny thing was, it was still half full of water. Dad reached out with his hand and he grabbed a hold of it really tight. And then he started to look around for his family, and whoops, really close to him popped up Lisa's head. He saw this little head, and Dad took, remember, this hand was holding on tightly to that side of the canoe. He took his other hand and he reached out as far as he could reach by still holding on, and he grabbed the edge of Lisa's life jacket and he held on as tight as he could. Well, that wasn't a real good hold he had on her, and his other hand was still holding on to the canoe. And he thought, if I let go of the canoe, I could probably get better hold of her with both hands. But then he tried to remove his hand off the side of the canoe, but it wouldn't come loose. He thought, this is really odd. But he had a hold of Lisa. But he was still wondering where Mother was and where Jerry was. And they had gotten over, so they were close to that tree. And Dad was still holding with this one hand. And he kept looking around. He couldn't see Jerry anywhere. And then he looked over there. He didn't see Mother. And then he looked down in that canoe. And there sat Jerry in the end of it, about waist deep in the water. And Dad said, "Jerry, you're all right." And Jerry said, "Yeah." And Dad said, "How did you get there? How did you get in the canoe?" Jerry said, I guess my angel put me there. I just looked up and I was in the canoe. Well, Dad, now he was really praying. He was thanking God that his two kids were okay. Lisa reached up with her free hand and she grabbed one of the roots on that tree bottom, and she was able to climb up on top of that big tree trunk. And she said, Dad, now you have both hands to hold on to the canoe, which Dad was. And then Jerry climbed up. Well, Dad was still holding on to that canoe, trying to figure out how he could get the water out of it. It would be too heavy for them to get back in. Plus, the oars were gone. He wondered about Mother. Well, while all this was going on, at the end of the tree there, Mother, when she had been thrown out of the canoe, she immediately was pulled by the current down, down, down in that dark water underneath that tree. And you know, the problem with that is the tree was so big and there were so many branches, and the roots that weren't above the water were all down, going into the bottom of the river. And Mother knew there was no way she could get out. And she thought, I'm going to die. And the only thing she could think of to say was, Lord, into your hands I give my life. Well, that was a good prayer. And then suddenly, Mother was up on top of the tree trunk. The only thing she could figure out was her guardian angel had put her there. Her leg hurt so bad. She must have hit really hard when she flew out of the canoe, and her leg was broken. And she sat there on that tree trunk, and she thought, there's absolutely no way I could have crawled up here with a broken leg. She couldn't even move that leg. But she sat there and was one thankful lady. Well, then, of course, she wondered about her family, and she started looking around, and she looked down that tree trunk, and clear at the other end of the tree sat her two children up on the tree, and she could see her husband still holding on to the edge of that canoe. Well, it wasn't too long that another canoe came making its way down the river, and of course, they saw those people on top of that floating tree, and the man holding on to a canoe that was half full of water. Well, they maneuvered as carefully as they could over to where Dad and the kids were. Between Dad and those two men, they were able to lift up enough on the canoe to pour the water out of it. Now, the guys, the canoe that they were in was not big enough to hold that family of four plus the two men. So they said, you guys just hang on tight here, keep a hold of your canoe, and we'll go get a rescue team. We'll be back. And you know, they kept their promise. And it wasn't long till, indeed, there was a rescue team that came. And they got Jerry and Lisa and Dad and tied the canoe to their boat. And then they floated down and they got Mother. Well, the family, they had so much to be thankful for. When they had all been rescued, before they left from their vacation, which they'd had to cut short, and after they had taken Mom to the hospital and they put her leg in a plaster cast, they were all back in the car going home. And Dad had said, you know, we should thank Jesus for taking such good care of us. We must have really good guardian angels. And then he said, you know, Mom, I lost my wallet in the river. And while they were praying to thank God for taking such wonderful care of them, Dad added on to the end of his prayer. He said, and Jesus, I lost my wallet in the river. Would you help somebody to find it that really needs some money? You know, this happened quite a while ago in the 80s, and most people didn't just carry credit cards and debit cards with them. When they went on vacation and things, they had a wallet full of money to pay for their hotels and the stuff that they were going to do and eating out. Daddy probably had a substantial amount of money in that wallet. Well, when they got home, they got Mama all settled on the couch with her plaster-covered leg up on a pillow and ice on top of it and something for the pain. And they were all so thankful to be there. And the phone rang. Well, Daddy answered it and he said, hello, this is Mr. Frisbee. The man's voice on the other end said, I found your wallet. And Dad said, well, thank you. And Dad said an interesting thing. And he said to that man, he said, did you have a really big need for some money? And the man said, how did you know I've been praying to Jesus that he would send us some money? And then Dad told the story about the river and how he had lost his wallet and how he had prayed that God would have somebody find his wallet that was really in need. And the guy on the other end of the line was amazed. Dad said, so what I want you to do is I want you to take half of the money out of the wallet and keep it for your reward. And I want you to mail me the wallet and the rest of the money, because when I go to church, I want to give a big thank offering to God for taking care of us. Our God is so good to send ministering angels, is what the Bible calls them, to take care of us in our times of need. Remember that your angel is with you. Bye-bye now, boys and girls. I'll see you next week.